These are how you probably know me a little bit more. I had a different look in the old days. It wasn't exactly this, but in the 70s, this was the a sort of a standard look, although my recollection is that the roads were packed with people with similar outfits and similar look and demeanor, and it made us all feel at home. In my particular case, that's my license, which comes in handy if you're being picked up by a lot of drunks. One of the things they're after is someone who can drive. So if you do have a valid driver's license, it really does help your hitchhiking career. The picture on the right is my college graduation picture that my mother cried when she saw it and refused to buy any copies. So this is the proof which I saved. But for about 4.5 years, I was a very active hitchhiker. By a show of hands, how many people in the audience here have done more than 5 hitchhiking trips in their life? Nice, very nice. You will relate to this and understand a lot of what I'm going to share with you. My trips, everybody has unique trips. Mine concentrated, I had 2 long-distance trips back from Texas. I found myself getting there easier than getting back because I went with someone else and they dropped me off and then I found my way back. There's one from the red line is from South Dakota, from Rapid City area. The green line is a long trip from Morgantown, West Virginia, out to Glacier National Park, up through Banff, all the way back across the Great Lakes and back to Morgantown. And there's one very peculiar one that was when I was deciding whether I was insane or not, where I hitchhiked in January for an appointment. I hitchhiked from New Hampshire into Morgantown, West Virginia, with a fellow, but that wasn't my problem as much as it was the fellow I went with who was from Sierra Leone. And he thought this was a very strange country. The lessons that I have learned, a lot of the are very applicable. There are probably 7 points that I'm going to make for you today. And they're applicable both in the hitchhiking experience as well as transferring over into public service. Appreciating the moment. You have a lot of moments on highways like that where there is not a lot of movement and you are on your own. If you don't appreciate the moment that you're there and all the moments, you will drive yourself crazy because you'll say, why did I do this? On the side of the road, you get to appreciate at the pace that you're at. You get to appreciate weather patterns. Sometimes it hails, sometimes it's nice weather. You get to appreciate a lot more about what makes the country tick. You get insights into each community as you're going through towns and cities, and each rural area. And that is a very useful thing to know that the rest of the world doesn't always operate the way that you have. You need to, I'll give you an example of appreciating the moment. You never know what the day is going to bring, because in the one time I was in Rapid City, South Dakota. I was trying to head back to New Hampshire. It's 95 degrees. I'm on the interstate. Just done a week backpack in the Black Hills, and headed out. Winnebago stops. Winnebago and anyone who has hitchhiked before are not your normal vehicles that stop. This one stopped, and they're waving me on, so I do. I approached the vehicle, and it was a trust fund baby who had just bought a brand new Winnebago, had brought all her friends. They were touring the country. They had a refrigerator full of beer and cabinets full of some strange type of tobacco I couldn't even identify. And what they were after was a driver. That I can do. So I found myself that evening driving a Winnebago across the plains. Who would have known that? I drove it right to Chicago, let myself out. That is a pretty, it's a pretty sweet gig, and you just have to appreciate that moment. In public service, you have to appreciate the moment. There are some down times in public service where you think you can't get anything done. Appreciate those moments where you do get something done. You get to work with good people toward common goals and really make an impact in your community. Appreciate those, and those make the next day a lot easier to deal with. The second point I'd like to make, appreciate the characters along the way. Hitchhiking, there are an endless stream of characters. As I said, a lot of them are drunk. But the appreciation for their idiosyncrasies, what makes them tick, getting to know them. You're spending a lot of time in the front seat talking to them. And I was impressed at how generous and kind the vast majority of them were. For example, I was on that same trip back from South Dakota, I found myself, I was buzzed out. I hadn't had any sleep because I was the driver, right? So I couldn't really sleep while I was driving to Winnebago, and I kept going, get to Pennsylvania, and I'm bushed. The guy thought I was going a different direction. We get about 50 miles out of the way, and suddenly I wake up, and he looks at me and says, "You're not doing real well." And I said, "That's right." He said, "Here's $5. We're going into a shop. You're going to buy yourself a sandwich and a pop. Come back here, and I'm going to drive you back to where your point is, back up the road." And he did, and that was just, I was overwhelmed at the generosity and the kindness. I ran into that type of activity regularly, and I'm very grateful. In public service, you have to appreciate the characters, because there are, any given day, people who walk into your office with an idea. They are all over the board, and some of them you take your breath away. And you can appreciate the breath being taken away and on the value of that, but there are those times where a crazy idea, when you actually give it time to come together, actually has some merit. And you say, "Huh, thank you. I appreciate you sharing that with me." Patience is the lifeblood of hitchhiking. If you wanted to be there somewhere on time, you shouldn't be doing this. But it does give you the time to appreciate the journey. It's a process thing. Connie always reminds me that I'm too much a product and goal-oriented person. This was the ultimate process experience, to be able to enjoy it as you go along and to pace yourself. Public service, nothing happens overnight. You're dealing with a lot of organizations, a lot of different factors, all of whom may have similar goals but not the same goal, and trying to draw them together to get somewhere is total process. Celebrate the victories when they come at the end of it. If it's a sidewalk that took you 10 years to build, thank you, appreciate it, move on. Ask good questions. I wish I had learned this years before. The start of the hitchhiking trip that started with a phone call in New Hampshire going to Fargo, North Dakota, and then on up to Canada and all around, my longest one I ever did. I got a call from a former girlfriend who said, I'm on this Indian reservation in North Dakota, and I'm really lonely. I remember that word particularly. I'm really lonely, and I was wondering whether you're going to be in the neighborhood this summer. Well, I had about 6 weeks to play with, and I didn't have any particular plans other than the next day I was driving to Morgantown, West Virginia, which I did, and left my car, which was not going to get any farther, hitchhiked to Cincinnati, Madison, Wisconsin, St. Paul, Minnesota, show up in Fargo probably 6 days after that phone call. This is where the good questions would have come in very handy, because the good question would have been at the very beginning, well, what do you have in mind? That might have been a good question. I knew what I had in mind. But in the process, we get there, we do normal things, go into a bar, have a couple quick cold ones, and then start to chat. And she says, well, can you stay? Oh, it's so good to see you. Can you stay to the weekend? I said, well, what's happening this weekend? That was my first good question. She said, well, I'm getting married. And then my next question was probably one of my best ones in a while. I said, not to me, right? And she confirmed that it was not to her, that it was to her former boyfriend she'd just broken up with. Then I said, well, my best question of the whole evening was, Kathy, since you knew this, that you were getting married in the phone calls that we'd had while I was on the road, why did you not choose to share this little bit of information with me? She said, well, I was afraid you wouldn't come. Which was a very perceptive thought. So, but it put me in Fargo, North Dakota, and I managed to then 6 o'clock in the morning, leave the next day, went out to Missoula, Montana, went out to the wilderness area in Bob Marshall, went up to Glacier and up to Banff and across Canada. I never would have had that experience had I either stayed in Fargo, North Dakota, or if I had never ventured out the door. So asking those good questions would really help you. And that's the same thing in public service, trying to get to the bottom. A lot of people have sort of fuzzy ideas about improving things, and when you ask them defining questions, you really can get to the core of what the problem is and then therefore create a solution. Listening is very important, and it's important to become a good listener. If you're sitting for 1,600 miles with one ride, you want to be a good listener because you want to hear if they're snoring. They don't drive nearly as well. And so you need to know when to grab the wheel away if that snore gets to the point that you recognize it as such. It's important you can learn a whole lot about different people. You are in a situation where you're with someone that you did not choose to be with and you don't know anything about. And it's a learning process. It's like a dating game. And you get to learn so much about someone you would not normally run into and get a perspective on living and where they're coming from that is unique, and you seem to just need to appreciate that experience. Becoming a good listener is also critical when you are in public service or an elected official, to find out what is on people's minds. People, whether you're in a group like this or you are walking down the street, people are not hesitant, you might guess, to share with you their great insights into making the world better. And that's well and good, and that's what you signed up for. That's your tour of duty. But the goal is to listen attentively enough so that and make enough eye contact and really hear what they're saying and not jump to preconceived notions that you think you know what they're saying. When you get down to that, a lot of people want to be heard, and they have access to somebody who they think can make a difference and help things get better. You owe that to them, to listen to them. Be selective and learn how to say no. There are a lot of rides you don't want to be on. Some involve alcohol, it's true. In fact, most of them do. One time in just Ovando, Montana, just a small town area, guy comes up, pulls in front of me, and he opens the door, waves me on, but the 5 beer cans roll out the door. Oh, in sequence, and that it sounded good until I heard the 5th one. So there are times where you really just don't choose to do that one, and it makes better sense to pass that one by. But learning how to say no is also important, because I was in Sudbury, Ontario, which is not the most delightful place, but he'd taken me 1,600 miles, so I was thankful for that ride. But he asked me the following question at 5 o'clock in the morning in a parking lot where his car was acting funny. He asked me, would you help me, Jimmy, open the hood of this car, because I have to get this guy's battery and put it into the car so we can continue driving? And the answer to the question would be, it's been a wonderful ride. Thank you so much for asking, but I am going to proceed on. I think I can find a ride somewhere else. In politics and in public office, everybody has great ideas, and they all cost money. You have a limited pool of funds to work with. Learning how to say no so that people are heard and that you are trying to work toward a solution that may be not the costly one that they might have thought of to begin with, but learning how to work with them to get that same thing accomplished is valuable. And a lot of times it says no, you mean to say no to this one so that you can move it around to approach it in a different way. You can't say yes to everything, but your opening day, my first advice to anybody running for public office is, it's the day that you are elected, is the day that all the people who were not successful with your predecessor are coming to your doorstep because they think there's a new sheriff in town and they're going to be more successful with that same great idea. And the last one is to overcome your fears. A lot of people think that hitchhiking in that day was inherently dangerous. And I think it was. I was naive and young and didn't take it as seriously and depended on the goodwill of people, and found that goodwill was reinforced in my experience. But you also have to overcome. The first time you go out hitchhiking, it was boy, I wonder if this is going to work out. And each time you did it, when you got let off in the south side of Chicago at 10 o'clock at night, when you got let off at East St. Louis, and people are yelling at you from underneath the bridge, there are those moments you wonder how that is going to all work out. But you learn to go through it, and you learn that the process of the adventure requires some of that overcoming your fears. Same thing in public office. You have to be willing to take risks and overcome some fears. For instance, I'll give you the example here. First Fridays didn't exist for a couple years before I became mayor. It was brought to me by the merchants, and they said, well, how about if we allow alcohol within our areas to complement this great First Friday activity? And the traditional approach is, well, it's going to all screw up. Everybody's going to get drunk. There's going to be life as we know it is going to be compromised. And I said, well, what if we try it? What if we try it on a test basis? And my council and I basically said, we'll give it a trial run, we'll watch it, we'll monitor it. It has become one of the most successful activities to define Lewisburg and the openness and the joyousness of downtown life. And I'm just very thankful for my council being willing to step out and overcome their preliminary fears. I appreciate your attention, and thank you so much for being here.